Hey folks, I want to talk to you about this application Readeo. I strongly recommend Readeo to help grandparents and parents read to their grandchildren remotely when they can't be in the same room. Whether you're living across the country, across the world, or you're just gone on a business trip, Readeo makes it easy for you to read to those young ones when you're away. It's a super easy tool that allows for video monitoring across the top of the screen so they can see you and you can see them, as well as having the book prominently displayed, making it easy for you to read to those young ones, or better yet, having them read to you. What I want you guys to do is go to cool-grandpa.us, look for the affiliate link for Readeo, click on that link, and sign up today for your free trial. Welcome back. I'm excited for you guys to share this conversation with Greg Vance and myself. Now, Greg Vance is a business and a career coach who's helped a lot of people move from careers and jobs and areas where they're just stuck, not being fulfilled, into careers where they're excited for Monday morning to roll around, that they're excited to get into work, to do what they're meant to do. So you guys are really going to enjoy this career conversation. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about before we get started is that I am launching a speaking practice as well. Now, the thing that I talk about is the leadership lessons from grandfathers. There's so many of them, like listening, like having empathy, and many other values that we would have as a leader that I've discovered and learned and have had reinforced talking with all these grandfathers. So if your organization would love to hear leadership lessons learned from grandfathers, check out my website, go to my speaking section, and then review that, and then reach out to me. I'd be happy to come and talk to your organization. So, without further ado, let's jump into this conversation with Greg. Hello, and welcome to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. This is your host, Greg Payne, coming at you from Studio 12. This podcast is about being the best possible grandpa you can be, focusing on what it is to be a grandpa and how we can all share that experience together for our grandchildren. Hi, Greg. I'm glad to have you back on the Cool Grandpa Podcast. This is exciting to have a second round with you and to talk about career changes and lifestyle changes and all these things that sometimes us grandpa age folks, and we'll call it, let's say, mid 40s on up, can sometimes experience in life. You know, a lot of times we get into a career in our 20s or one direction, and then we have life changes that happen to us when we get older, and sometimes we want to reevaluate just kind of where we are. So I appreciate having a career coach and a business coach on here to talk to us about some of these changes that we have going on in our lives.
Well, thanks, Greg. Good to see you again. And yeah, I'm excited to dive into some of these things tonight. And I hope that really can benefit somebody that's listening.
Oh, absolutely. I'm sure it will. It's always great to kind of listen in like you're overhearing that conversation at a coffee shop with the hot stock tip that you heard next door, or you know, folks talking about different things that you can take into your own life and get some value out of. So I'm hoping that's what the listeners get out of this.
Awesome.
Now, one of the things that really kind of sparked this conversation for me, or wanting to discuss career changes and lifestyle changes, is over the last year or so at some weddings and other events, I've been talking with other people around my age, meaning around 50, where some of the folks are, you know, talking about like, oh, I found a place, I'm not really in love with it, but I'm going to hunker down and kind of ride it out till retirement. It's not even so much about pensions anymore, because so many of those have gone away even as my generation or our generation were joining the workforce. A lot of those were being phased out, but there's still this, I think, idea of when you kind of hit your late 40s, early 50s, you find a place, you kind of hunker down and you just ride it out to retirement. And I'm not sure that's really the world anymore, or that it has to be the world anymore. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so it's interesting you brought that up, and as you said, that's not a uncommon conversation to hear at any type of event that you're at. But what you just said there really describes where I was many years ago when I was in my late 40s, and then definitely into my early 50s. I really started thinking about, is this? I've been in my career for a long time, had good success with it, and really was just thinking about, is this what really are my best ways that I can give back and use my skills and abilities to their fullest extent, and to make a difference for others and myself and my family. And so I really went on a journey to dive into that. I read lots of books. Podcasts weren't around then, but I wish they were. But they were just starting. And so I found great information there. And we've got a mutual connection, that is Dan Miller. And I came upon Dan's radio show at the time, which he had started releasing as a recording. Then it became a podcast. And it was my go-to book that I went to, as well as I listened to everything that he put out. And I actually became part of his coaching community. And it was one of the first groups that he had launched with that. But I really went on a quest to determine what my future was going to look like and to solve that problem for myself. Now, some advice, and we hear this about, doctors, like, don't be your own doctor, is some good advice. Well, probably shouldn't be your own career coach either. I found that out. I ended up hiring Dan Miller as my personal career coach. It made all the difference.
Oh, wow. That's great advice. And that book was the 48 Days to the Work You Love.
Right. Yeah. Should have mentioned that. Yep. Dan's book. He's written a number of books, but his first one, and the one he's best known for, is 48 Days to the Work You Love.
Oh, yeah. Well, and the reason I wanted to identify the book is because he's also has, a few books, but No More Dreaded Mondays is kind of a follow-on, so to speak, to the 48 Days book. So I just want to make sure I got that one right. And Dan's been very impactful to a lot of people. And some of us, find out about Dan through Dave Ramsey even, or through just generally, he's kind of the guru of the coaching and the career coaching space. Now, absolutely. What was some of the things that were going on that were causing this, lack of a better word, unsettlement, maybe this thing where you're kind of waking up and going, oh, is this it? Is this just what I'm supposed to be doing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In my case, and I think part of, if you've ever read the book, Halftime by Bob Buford, I believe was the author of it. He talks a lot in there, and other authors refer to this as well. And there becomes a certain time for most people, men and women, that their focus moves from success to a focus on significance. So what they can do to make a difference in the world versus, we all, especially us that have families, and you have that financial burden of your kids probably won't go to college. You've got just normal expenses and things. And so you spend all the time, whomever the wage earners are in the family, they've got that quest to keep the cash coming in. and at some point, it gets a little weary because it can be very stressful, because there's always that quest to move forward, which is what my case was, to move forward. And I really found that my career, and I was an information technology professional and executive, and I found that I really wasn't getting the same satisfaction out of my career any longer. And I felt like even though I was able to coach others and to make a difference for the organization, I just felt that drop in enjoyment from what I was having to do. And, part of that's just you've been at it a while and you kind of get tired of red tape and the time it makes to make decisions. And frankly, for me, it was, hey, I've always really wanted to start my own business. When's the time that I'm going to be able to do that? How's that fit into my next steps in my life? What is that possible? What's it going to take for me to be able to do that? And as important as all that is, how am I ever going to get my spouse to buy into this idea and my family? And so that was the quest that I went on. And so that was my journey, was really trying to move to a place where I felt like I was really making a bigger impact and was personally filling my needs. And I felt like I was fulfilling my purpose and my passion here on the earth.
That's great, because I'm going to ask you the follow-up question of, did some of this start coming about as your kids were getting older in high school and hitting those late teen years and early 20 years?
I guess coincidentally, yeah, it did. There was some, I guess, congruence between those times. I don't know if what you're asking is, did the fact of thinking about what they're going to do spur energy for me to think about my next thing? That probably wasn't as big as a factor for me, but I know it is for other people.
Where I was going with that was more, even as a personal story, was a little bit of, just like you were saying, I've been an IT PM and I was a business analyst before that, have done very similar type work. But I found that as my kids were getting out of high school and hitting their 20s, that was when it started to be a little bit of like, okay, kids are secure. I mean, they still cost money at this point, but we're not necessarily worrying about throwing on braces or knees getting blown out at soccer practice, or band camp is going to cost this much. It's a different type of expenses that go on. Irregular budgeting at that point, I would say. The idea of like, okay, the house is pretty secure, the kids are pretty much on their own. There's a little bit of, I think, natural tendencies to have a breather to reflect inwards, where before that it's, hey, we're going to work every day, we're doing what we're doing, and if we're lucky, we really love it and enjoy it and it's a calling. If we don't, then we kind of just slug our way through it and get through it. But we hit this point, I think, as grandfathers, where there's a little bit of, okay, things are stable, and it gives us that minute to catch our breath and then start to examine of, okay, what do I want to do with the next 20, 30 years of my working life?
I got your point. Yes. So in my case, I was probably a little bit earlier at that. My kids were, they were both, one was just had started high school and the other was in middle school still. And so that's when I was really starting to process this and to kind of connect on what you said, when I would bring this up to my wife, and she's super supportive, but she would give me that look like, okay, but I know what you want to do this, but we got this, trajectory we're on, especially financially.
Right.
We got to get them out of high school and into college. And if you can make it happen, awesome, but I don't have a plan yet. So let me hear the plan.
Yeah, no, I think definitely. Well, and we talk about this middle-age crisis or midlife crisis, right? That hits. Mm-hmm. And I think it can scare our spouses somewhat when we come home and we start going with, honey, what do you think if I started a tie-dye shop out of the garage and I can sell tie-dye shirts online and, and give up my X thousands of dollars, secured job to sell tie-dyes. I think there's a little bit of a natural panic Yeah,
exactly.
Now, what do you find is going on when you're working with people that are coming to you for the first time to talk about this? Do you find a lot of people that are really driven, hey, I know what I want to do, I just need some help to get there? Or are you finding people are almost very much almost like, I've got an itch or I've got something, I just can't scratch it and I can't define what this thing is? How do you find people that are coming to work with you?
Yeah. So, and maybe I'll put them into three buckets, and you already hit two of them there. So the one is, I've got somebody that has a pretty firm idea of what they want to do, but they're not sure of the steps they need to go through, how to create, and if they're going to start, it could be a one of two things. I have people that come to me and say, I've been doing X and I really would like to shift to Y. And so they're going to make a significant career transformation, a career change. So I had, for example, a gentleman that was a pastor, and he basically said, for various reasons, I still have a ministry, but I don't want to do it as a professional pastor anymore. I have always wanted to move into the corporate world and to make a difference there. So we worked on that. So that's a significant transformation. I've got many other stories like those, but other people may have an idea of a business they want to go into. And as you said, at the other extreme is the person that says, I know something's not right here. I'd love for you to help me walk through this and figure out what it is that's not right, and then help me to form a direction and a plan that makes sense for me. And then in the middle, you've got the person that is, they've kind of got it figured out a little bit, but they're still, maybe they've got some obstacles. Financial ones are a big one. Spouses are a big one. And the reason, let me add some explanation behind that. One of the first questions I ask a person when they come to work with me potentially is, tell me where your spouse, what are their thoughts on your plan, your situation, the problem you're trying to solve, et cetera. And if they say, well, I'm not really sure, I haven't talked to him about it yet, then I typically will say, that's not good news. You really need to, unless you're planning, not to make light of it, unless they're planning to make a change with their marriage or something as well. But I say, I really encourage you to go have a discussion with your spouse. I'll be happy to give you some ideas or some materials to help work through that with them. And then, then come back after you talk to them. I'll be happy to talk to both of you. I've done that before. Well, I'll talk to a husband and a wife and just try and help them look at things and sort it out a little bit.
I was wondering too, is if this also can sometimes feel, when somebody's coming to you, almost like maybe this person's been in a relationship for a long time, whatever it is, the spouse knows this person, right? And they're about to reveal that my favorite color used to be blue, but now it's red, and what I mean by that is, like, there's a big shift that's coming, and maybe it's a little, I don't know how to navigate those waters and that communication with the spouse, similar to what you were talking about initially with your own case. It was, okay, what's the money situation going to look like? What's the, the security and everything else that's around that? And knowing how to phrase those discussions, I think, becomes really important. What suggestions do you have for people that are even maybe not ready for a coach, but are starting to think, hey, I need to make a shift? And what are some tips that maybe you have for that communication with the spouse or other family members even?
Yeah. So obviously the first thing is you've really got to, hopefully, your spouse well, how to communicate to them, whether they prefer a giant dump of information and, as you just said, kind of the unveiling of all these thoughts that you've had and just kind of doing a brain dump, or if you need to ease into it at a more gradual pace and to build up a little bit over time, kind of turn up the heat a little bit, so to speak. And so, that's very important, is to understand and make sure that you use your spouse's communication style, to the best advantage to help communicate that well. And then part of it's, really having the discussion. Yeah, if you're the spouse trying to make the change, obviously you've got this internal set of desires that you need to put out, but don't do it in such a way that it leaves the other person hanging for, well, how do I fit into this now? Or how does, have you taken my needs or thoughts or et cetera into account in this? So the better that you can weave that into the communication, the better off the things are going to be.
Oh yeah, that's great advice, because I think some of the mistakes that I've heard about or have seen have been, the person that comes home and they bought 5 soft pretzel machines, and the spouse comes home, opens the garage, here's these soft pretzel trucks, or something similar as dramatic, and it's, oh yeah, I quit my job and next week I'm going to be selling pretzels down by the courthouse because it's a busy corner and I already got my business license and that's what I'm doing. And that just leads to a whole lot of, well, one, I think a lot of hurt feelings that can come out of that because the other person wasn't involved in some of the decision making, or even just knowing it, right? Is that
right?
It's that case of, and a lot of guys do that. I mean, I think a lot of us start down that path of problem solving, internal communication, whatever, working things out in our own heads and not necessarily being great with letting that information out until it just kind of explodes out, or there's a dramatic shift of, hey, I've emptied my 401k, I bought into this franchise, surprise. So it can definitely be tricky, but I think the biggest thing, like you were saying, is just that communication and starting it early. I think if you're starting to think that maybe this career, this job isn't for you and isn't a long place situation anymore, is starting to have that discussion early, and then letting the partner and the family even be, I think, part of that journey with you.
Yeah, and to that point, and you said something that just triggered a thought in my mind here is, often if two spouses know one another well, as you said earlier, if you've basically kind of put this off for a while and the pressure is starting to build up into, I want to make the change, but you haven't said anything, there's a really good chance that your spouse has already said, like, hey, like, what's going on? Or they've already had some signs or noticing some things that you're just not pleased with your work life any longer, let's say, and they're starting to see some signs, you're dropping some hints along the way. So sometimes there's a nice meeting of the minds of, they've kind of already noticed something and you've unconsciously started communicating it. And then when you have that conversation, there's not as much shock value to the whole thing. But yeah. I find that for most people, and it doesn't really matter whether it's the woman or the man that wants to make the change. The more that we said earlier, you're taking the other spouse into account, but also the more that you've got a plan, or at least you're willing to involve them in the plan, that's awesome for helping things to move forward very smoothly.
No, I couldn't agree more. I think, and that's always one of those tricky things. And again, I'm going to paint all of us guys with a very broad brush as far as maybe not being the best communicators, but something that we need to call out again and again is, hey, start those conversations early and often. And, it's one of those, like you said, you may not be holding as much information back as you think you are.
Exactly.
The complaining about work, or the, hey, wouldn't it be great if we lived in Phoenix when you're living in Minneapolis? So comments and things like that, the other person's probably picking up on more than you realize.
Mm-hmm. One of the things, let me add one more thing in there, is one of the things that I did, which was, I don't know if I was wise or it just kind of worked out. I don't know, but it was, so I wasn't a coach yet. I started working with Dan Miller. And when I had the sessions with him, typically you would do them over the phone. Well, I would actually drive to Nashville. And so that's a 6-hour drive from where I am. And I would ask my wife to go with me, and she would sit in on the sessions, because being that intermediary, talking to a coach, if I were to come home, 6 hours to driving later and just dump all this on her, there's a lot to unpack there, versus having her sitting there and listening to both of us and her being able to ask questions. Oh my gosh, it was incredible.
No, I'm going to chalk that up to being wise, because I'd learned the hard way about doing what you were just talking about. And what I mean is, in the first part of December, I had back surgery, and through all the doctor's appointments, I was taking my wife with me, because I know myself enough that when I go see the doctor and he goes, yeah, you have a really messed up back and here's everything we have to do, the message when I get home is going to be, yeah, I've got a few things going on with my back. We're going to go ahead and do surgery, but it's not going to be that big of a deal. Where, the messaging in the office is a little bit more detailed and involved than what I would probably relay back to my wife. And I'm sure, the same thing with you. You've had 6 hours to process your meeting with Dan. You could get home and give a 15-minute synopsis on everything, and then there was still tons of information and input that Dan had that just wouldn't have made that connection. So
right.
I'm going to say that's one reason we're still around and we've got the gray hairs, is that we've picked up on a few things here and there, to include the wives.
Exactly. I loved your example there. That's a really good life example.
Yeah.
And I'd say the other thing is, if you've got two spouses, whether you're buying a car or you're going through coaching, you're going to hear things differently and you're going to ask different questions. And so there's wisdom in the two of you working together.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's why, we tend to pair up, is because we normally will complement or at least fill in the gaps for each other. So that's awesome.
Spot on.
And guys, pay attention to that. That's some awesome free advice that Greg, and we're not going to care which one, but Greg gave you some good advice there. Now, one thing I wanted to ask you is, what are some of the differences or myths and truths about job hunting nowadays? Let's say if you're in your 50s on up, compared to, I think, when we were much younger. Let's say go back to the 70s, 80s, 90s, right? Because I know when my dad was my age, being out of work, trying to find work, unless you were at a certain level professionally, it was tough. Like, that's why I think there was a lot of this mentality of, you get to a certain age and you just hunker down. You don't get fired. You don't take risks. You might work at one more career advancement, but it was very much this idea of getting in there. I'm too old to go job hunting. But I don't think that's the same thing anymore. So I'm curious, from your perspective, what are some of the myths that are out there that maybe we need to, forget about, that those were our grandfathers and fathers' issues to deal with?
Yeah. So there's a lot of things to hit upon there, as you just talked about. So a couple of things I'll throw out as far as what I'm hearing, and I keep in touch, obviously, with a lot of coaches, some colleagues, and things like that. And the things we talk about are people that are as old as 45 years old are now saying that they're being impacted by ageism. And so, before, maybe 10 years ago, maybe somebody was 60, 65, they were saying that, but now it's started to creep down. And whether that is factually true or it's perceived, it kind of doesn't matter, because it's in the person's head at that point. So that's a key thing. So some things that the advice that I give people are, number one, well, if you believe and you have some factual circumstances where you're not moving forward, it feels like you're really being held back due to ageism, well, you really need to really consider taking your career into your hands if you haven't been managing it well, and there may be a great opportunity to move to another organization that really values your experience and your seniority and such, because we tend to look at careers as a one size fits all. If you work at company A, B, C, or D, that you're going to get treated the same way based upon your skills and your age and whatever else it may be. And that's just not, there's some truth to that. Yeah, you can generalize a little bit, but there are definitely organizations that you can find that will value whatever it is that you may have, and they'll really move you forward as a result of that and value you more.
And I think too is what I've seen amongst people my age that have moved around a little bit is the idea of staying at a place for a long period of time used to be really valuable. There was always kind of a magic number of about 5 years or more. And now it's really not that uncommon to move around a little bit more. 18 months, I think, was one of the numbers that I heard. So a year and a half at a place. But that also gives us an opportunity to get in, check something out, see if it's a good fit or not, without having to make a long-term commitment, on either side. I mean, businesses don't want to keep hiring all the time. We understand that. But at the same time, the hiring and firing process is a lot faster, a lot more driven by quarterly results. And there's not the stigma of moving around as much.
Right.
I think the ageism part is definitely kind of there, but it's also a little bit of a mindset. Like you said, there's a little bit of, if you think of yourself as being picked on, that you're not getting work because of age, and that's the only thing you're focusing on, you're probably missing maybe some gaps in your skill set, maybe some other things. Maybe you're not presenting yourself well, or anymore in the interviewing process. Now, I will tell you right now, people can't see it, but I do have my beard grown out some, and it is quite gray. I think if I was going to go back into the interviewing, I'd probably lose the beard because of that, but I probably wouldn't dye my hair. Now, my hair's not real gray. It's blondish brown with some gray in it. But yeah, to your point, it is a little bit real, but it's also one of those things where I don't think people should let it affect their decision to move organizations or change career paths.
Right. Yeah. And so I guess a couple other things to link into what you said there. So sometimes ageism, the way someone may perceive that, but as you said, it could be that your skills are getting stale. You haven't done your part to manage your career and to stay current and to make sure that you've got the best value, versus the other person next to you, even if they're 10 years younger or 10 years older. You really got to be, showing up every day and providing value. And part of that's keeping on top whatever your craft is, and the skill set that you have. So that's super important. As you said, there's kind of a fine line when someone's been in a job for like 5 years and hasn't really moved, hasn't progressed throughout the organization. It does get harder to move outside the organization, sometimes even inside the organization. So, so a couple things that I know people overlook in my experience is, you've got a couple scenarios here where you can leave your organization and get a similar job outside the organization. You can stay inside your same organization and make a significant change in there if you've got a good reputation and all that. I've worked with people to help them create a position from scratch that doesn't exist, that's specifically made for them, that they can market internally, and they've had good success with that. I've done that personally myself, created a couple different positions from scratch inside organizations. And so it's a way, if you kind of step back a little bit and thinking to do that assessment of what really is the value that I provide to our organization. Some people call it your brand. Some people call it, that secret sauce that you have. But to really get in touch with what areas, what contribution is most valued and where you can excel, and then really focus on emphasizing that, lighting a fire under it. And if your own organization, if you can't make that really blaze in your own organization, look to do it outside. That may be another organization. It may be consulting. It may be contingent worker, as you said, where you're going through periodic contracts. That is so much more acceptable nowadays than it was in the past. In the past, contractors were looked at as, in some organizations, like second class people. That's like, give it to the contractor, they're not going to be here, or something like that. But now they're much more respected, and they've really become an integral part of the organization and may be around for 6 months, a year, 2 years, something like that. So, and you can string those together into a very nice portfolio of experiences that help build your craft to go forward.
That's some great advice. The one thing that was jumping out at me is, so for somebody that's taking responsibility for their career, what are some of the better training programs that are out there? I mean, with LinkedIn has, I think it's lynda.com is their kind of training certification. Google, Microsoft, these guys all have training around their products. And there's some other training things out there, but are any one of these things better than anything else? Because I sometimes feel like the way lynda.com is put out there is that it's, and I'm not meaning to pick on LinkedIn and Microsoft for this, but it's a little bit of resume filler, or it can be perceived like that, right? Like,
Right.
Because in my mind, I had spent a lot of years at UPS, and so we would have 3-day training courses on whatever, and we had the expert from Dover that would fly in and give us this information and work on this training. Now it's online. I can take it, and then I take the test, I pass it, and now LinkedIn says, well, Greg's a certified Excel level 1 user.
Yeah, so I'd say it's a case of there's not a one size fits all, because it really varies by the vertical of your career. If you're in finance versus you're in information technology, or even there's many different domains inside there. If you're into data analysis and manipulation, that's another specific area. But anyway, to take it back, I would urge someone that's in their current position is figure out what your company values, or figure out where you're going to go with a direction in mind, what's going to be valued there, and really to look at hard skills and soft skills, because I'm sure you've worked with people that are just excellent at the technical side of their job, the hard skills, but they can't communicate. They tick people off, and and just the skills leave something to be desired. I mean, that's going to hold you back just as much as the flip side of that, where you've got somebody that's got strong soft skills, but they really don't have anything to back it up in their hard skills. So I'd really say, you need to do an assessment, kind of like a little SWOT analysis of yourself, and figure out what it is that you feel the gaps are. And then you can look for those domains of courseware that's available. And as you said, if you want to get some things that are more basic, lynda.com is fine, Udemy is fine. And even if you want to go a little bit to the next level, if you know what the acronym MOOC stands for, massively open online courseware. And so there are many different MOOCs. So you might think of them as a portal that provides access to many different educational programs. So for example, you could take a class in finance from Harvard. You could take a marketing class from Stanford. You could, some community college level at economics, whatever it makes sense. The idea is they've pulled together the top programs. You can essentially create your own curriculum in there. Some result in some sort of degree or certificate, others don't, but you're able to string together that type of information and academic experience that you need in order to move you forward. And there's very specific ones that I was saying to dive into. So if you're someone that is really into business analysis and data analysis, there's a lot of people that really like Data Camp. It's one of those specialty sites that teaches you R and some other languages to dive in and to manipulate data and to work towards being a data scientist.
That's good to know, and I'll see if I can't find a few of those things and put them in the show notes as well, so
Yeah.
people can have a chance to look at what some of those are. One question I have and that I wanted to bring up is the difference between finding a coach and maybe even a therapist. We're certainly talking career here, but I think sometimes lines get blurred as far as, what does a coach do compared to maybe what a therapist would do?
Yeah, that's a great question. And even someone will ask, what's the difference between a life coach and a career coach, for example? So typically on a kind of a therapist, counselor type basis, they're going to work with you on a specific set of challenges that you need to overcome. Those roadblocks that are holding you back, they may be emotional things, they may be things that have happened in the past, and they're really there to more listen and to help you work through dealing with those emotions and things that are holding you back. Versus a coach is really there to help you assess the situation that you have, ask great questions, and then help you to create a path forward to move you to a desired goal. And so sometimes in therapies, the goal is a little more nebulous. And I'm generalizing.
Sure.
Some therapists will be insulted out there, but that thinks coaches are bad too. But anyway, but for a coach, me as a coach, I have a very specific set of goals that I've agreed to work toward with my client. And so we're not just headed on a journey without a destination and a map. We got to figure out what the destination is and then create a map to get us there.
Okay. So very, very, I mean, if I had to encapsulate it a little bit, is very, coaching is very action oriented, probably shorter duration, maybe renewed at some point, but,
Yep.
Where maybe therapy is working on, like you said, maybe things from the past that internal roadblocks, confidence, whatever it might be. It's, hey, I want to get over this. Where coaching might be much more of a, to your point, what's our end goal, and then how do we get there, and then here's the time frame we're going to work together and get this thing done.
Exactly. And I guess another thing to throw in there is, very often we use the example of mindset. That's a popular term these days, and I'm a big believer in a growing mindset versus a fixed mindset in trying to achieve that. So a coach can be well equipped to help you work towards an improved growing mindset. On the flip side, though, if you've got a lot of other psychological, emotional trauma, something like that, that is really the basis of holding you back from getting to that mindset, that's really where a therapist needs to come in and professionally help from that viewpoint. And so and a good coach is going to know when to identify those and hopefully make a referral to some sort of therapist for that.
Oh, that's a great insight. Now, Greg, I've had you on for a good little bit here. Is there anything around coaching, career coaching, that I haven't asked you that you would like to bring up?
Yeah. So one of the things I thought might be helpful to weave into this discussion of, and especially relates back to working with your spouse and thinking about that, but you can do it on your own up front. And that is, I like to do what's called lifestyle design. And so for those of us, especially as you said, when we get to a certain point in our career, we're talking about grandfathers, grandmothers, grandparents here. You may be starting to consider, well, how do I want them, now that I have this bigger extended family, how do I want them to be involved, and what does life look like? So I do a lot of lifestyle design with people, and that's trying to think about, what does your life look like together, moving forward together? What sort of goals do you want to achieve? What sort of impact do you want to make? How do you want to spend your time? How do you want to earn? And essentially define, and I'm a big believer in using post-it notes and diagrams and whiteboards and all those sort of things, whatever the best way to do it. Some people like to write stories, but basically, if you were to design your ideal life story moving forward, what does that look like? And so that's a big place where I like to start with people. And my wife and I have done it for many years now on an annual basis. We go in and fine tune our lifestyle design. In fact, we just did that the last week of January, first week of February, when we were on vacation together. So we could really focus on this and focus on, getting recuperated and re-energized for the year coming up. But we did that, and we have found that it really helps us to make sure we're on the same page, the same path, the same plan to move forward. We have we have shared goals together, and maybe we have goals of our own, but we know about those with one another. And it's just been an amazing way for us to develop that foresight, that sight forward. And it's kind of one of those things that I endorse doing before someone's going to make any type of big change. They're going to change a company, they're going to make a major career transformation, they're going to start a business. I think it's super important to do that.
Oh, that's great advice. And I think it's one of those things too, like we had talked about earlier in the show, is that a lot of times guys just have stuff in their heads. They're working through stuff. And, when we get to this age of starting to have grandkids, our careers are, maybe 2/3 of the way through, whatnot, all those ambitions and things that we talked about with our spouses in our, let's say, our 20s and our 30s, you got to revisit those again, because now, you don't want to be handcuffed to those decisions and those world viewpoints and everything else that you made in those 20s and 30s. Because I would hate to be a prisoner to, as a person today, I'd hate to be a prisoner to myself from my 20s, and what that list of expectations and goals and everything was to what's going on today. So that's great as far as starting that process. And I like how you tied that in, is even thinking about that before you start making big career changes. Because if you're valuing having your evenings free and you have that where you are, you may not have that where you go work tech support somewhere else. And now you've got evening shifts and you've got other things going on. So very valuable information there. I appreciate that.
Yeah. I like I said, it's been invaluable for us, and we've shared it with other people, and obviously I've shared it with clients. It makes a significant difference in the level of communication and the ability to execute on the goals, because now hopefully you both have bought into them. And as you said earlier, there may be some things that one or both spouses have either, it's been a goal for a long time and it keeps getting pushed down, lower priorities, or there's something brand new. And now you've got the chance to, who wants to go to their, as they say, who wants to be on their deathbed saying, I wish I had done X. And it doesn't have to be career oriented. It could be something very important to your family or to some sort of legacy that you wanted to establish and leave behind. So one other thing I'll throw in, and I mentioned this earlier before our call today, is that I'm actually in the middle of working on putting together a book, a course, and a membership site and it's affectionately named for right now. My wife and I talked about this a lot in Florida. It's called Thriving Couples. And so it's really going to be to help people that are in the age groups that we're talking about, the type of situations, life decisions, help them to dream big dreams together, to get on the same page with those, and to figure out, okay, how are we going to make this work together? What's our actionable plan? And then to actually realize those goals.
That
I'm
sounds
excited
awesome.
about that.
No, I was just going to say, when that's starting to come out, let us know, and we'll be sure to share it with the community and let people come and find it and check it out, because it may be exactly what some of the couples that are listening to this podcast need.
Exactly. And I would love, even before that, I'd be happy to share that. Even before that, if people have, I don't know, questions, insights, anything like that, I'd love to learn, more about the challenges that they maybe are getting in their way, or some unique situation. Because I'd love to be able to, help them, but also build in some of that into the program as well.
Yeah, we'll definitely put some links to your webpage and everything else to it. Now, awesome. What's the best way that people can reach out to you, whether they're interested in connecting with you for coaching or finding out more about the Thriving Couples or lifestyle designs?
Yeah, they can just go to my website. It is careermeetspurpose.com. So obviously as I mentioned along the way, I'm a big believer in finding and living in your purpose. And so there's all sorts of contact information there. I'd be happy to, have anyone reach out and have a discussion.
Sure. And I'll put your LinkedIn, I'll put that into the show notes as well. So folks, please, if you hadn't had a chance to write that down, careermeetspurpose.com, I will have that in the show notes, so it'll be easy to find, and you can connect with Greg through his website or maybe even LinkedIn.
Awesome. That'd be fabulous. Love to meet anybody that needs some guidance.
Oh, absolutely. I'm sure this is going to be super helpful for folks. Greg, I've had you on for a while, and this has been a blast talking to you, and I really do appreciate you taking time out of your evening to sit down, talk with us about career coaching, talk with us about the state of job hunting in our middle-aged years, and just sharing a lot of valuable information with the Cool Grandpa podcast community. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. It's been a blast to be on here and to be able to talk through all these things, and like I said, hopefully help somebody that maybe feel like they're stuck and they want to be able to just give them some good insights to help move them forward tonight.
No, well, we appreciate it, and I'm sure this is going to be valuable for them. So thank you very much. I really do appreciate Greg taking the time to sit down with me, talk to me about finding a career with purpose in, let's say, our middle years, right? Let's say 40s on up. What really stuck out with me was that, we've got to be keeping our skills current. And I know that's a message that we've heard before, but we've really got to internalize that. Make sure that we're staying on top of latest trends, latest, even, I hate to say fashions within the business world, but there are fashions that go on. And making sure, too, that we take control and really manage our career. I think those days of joining an organization and then having people train you for the next level or having definite, clear career path are pretty much gone at this point, in that it's up to the individual employee, contractor, contributor, whomever, to sit down and really manage that career. And if you're not being appreciated in the organization and the role that you're in, being able to take control and start the process of finding an organization where you're a better fit and where your skills are going to be appreciated. The other thing, too, that I like that Greg talked about is not being your own career coach, meaning you might have to reach out, and you should reach out to somebody to help you through this process. And that process doesn't have to necessarily be an engagement where if it takes you 4 months or 5 months to get to a new career, that's how long the engagement is. A lot of times with career coaches, it's meeting for a shorter defined period of time that can help you identify gaps in your skill set when you're interviewing, help you with resume, help you with networking, and then essentially be able to let you go and find that work that you like with the ability to touch base with that career coach. So don't be afraid to reach out to somebody if you're in this position where you feel stuck, you haven't moved up in the organization in some time, and you feel like you need to make a change. A career coach is a great way to help motivate you, inspire you, and give you the latest tools and insights to what the job market is like today. So do me a favor, reach out to Greg through the links in the show notes and let him know what your big takeaway was from this conversation. After that, what I'd love for you to do is share this conversation with somebody that really needs to hear this, that needs some inspiration, that needs some information to help them make a decision whether to stay where they're at or move to another career. So, with all that being said, I hope you join us again next week for another episode of the Cool Grandpa Podcast. And remember to stay cool. Thank you for listening to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and share it with a friend. That's the best way you can help us to expand our community, as well as get the news out about how valuable grandpas are in the lives of those kids. If you'd like to leave me a comment or shoot me a potential topic for this podcast, please go to www.cool-grandpa.us. Look for the comments tab, fill it out, hit submit. It's as easy as that. Until next time, remember to stay cool.